Greetings, friends. Welcome to the Grit and Equity Talks podcast with yours truly, Dr. India White. I'm so thrilled to be here with you this week. Got a lot going on, a lot of traffic. I hope that you're, ending the school year well. I hope that kids are passing the classes. I hope that, your own children, your own family, those that you're connected to are doing great and thriving in education and just in general. Just wishing you nothing but good love, positive vibes. I'm super happy to be here with you guys. So I want to go ahead and get started. We'll start with some announcements, and then we'll get right into our podcast. So first things first, the Grit and Equity Talks podcast with Dr. India White will be featured on the X Factor EDU network, hosted by Dr. Matthew Joseph, and it can be found on Spotify. Okay, now next thing is that I want to encourage you guys to follow me whenever you get a chance on social media. My Facebook is Miss India White. LinkedIn is The India White. Twitter is Indie Speak and Teach. Instagram is Indie238. YouTube is India White123. And TikTok is Dr. India White. Super excited about that. I also wanted to remind you of some events. Right now, I'm currently hanging out in Wisconsin with you rockstars up here at the Wisconsin Math Council. Had a wonderful time. Thank you to Wisconsin, to Maggie McHugh and the tribe up here. It was wonderful to see all these amazing leaders that are really revolutionizing education and giving us what we need in efforts to really close the achievement gap and to help students from all backgrounds in their own unique ways. So I just thought it was beautiful that you had all of these unique leaders and, thought leaders and experts who all came together for a common cause. And so thankful for that. So I'm here. We're wrapping up the conference, but it has been phenomenal. I also have, I'm preparing to support FCTM as a speaker there. Also, I will be doing a keynote also coming up in Vegas. So I'll let you guys know more about that to come. So if you are an educator in that area, please put the word out because we are super excited. And I also will be at Camp's conference in July. I've got a couple of sessions there, so I hope to see you guys there. Also, we'll be at NCSM and NCTM, just hanging out. Also at ICTM in Iowa. So there's a lot going on, lots of movement, as you can see. So try to grab me at one of those and say hey. I just can't wait to see you guys. I get so excited when I think about it. So now, for those that are just tuning in, you're like, okay, with this, I wanted to just remind you of this podcast. So if you are trying to close the achievement gap, but you're having classroom management issues or your students just aren't motivated to do the work, then you can join me today on the Grit and Equity Talks podcast, and we can talk about some of those different things that you've got going on. I also wanted to remind you of the Grit Mini Workshop on the Grassroots Workshops website. Check that out whenever you get a chance. It's really reasonable. See if it can fit the budget of your school. See if you guys can do some PLCs together on that. Thank you, Robert, and the tribe for this awesome opportunity as well. So today, I wanted to get into talking about a really cool topic. And the reason why is because I've heard it so many different times from teachers like, okay, well, what is that? Whenever I do a presentation and we're talking about different effective teaching methods, teachers usually want me to go back over this. And I hate it when, teachers just really don't know what's going on. So I figured like I would elaborate. So I did write a blog for you guys, showed my love. I wrote a blog the other day on this. And so we're going to be talking about space versus mass practice and how we can use that to really help students and bridge the gap and, get students caught up and whatnot, and to really break down what does this really mean so that, we're not left in the dark. So with that said, I want to start out with just a little video on this. Okay, so I'm going to pull up this video for us so we can see exactly what this is all about. So here we go. Let's listen.
Hi, I'm Sydney. Rachel and I have some news for you about the importance of spaced versus massed practice.
Have you ever stayed up all night cramming for an exam? Teachers are always telling you not to do that, but did you know that there have actually been studies done that prove that cramming is not an effective way to learn new information?
Another name for cramming is massed practice. Basically, Massed practice is reviewing or learning material in a long, single session.
Okay, so I'm just going to pause her there. So for you teachers that are like, okay, what in the world was Dr. John Hattie talking about when he was talking about this as an effective teaching practice? So massed practice is when you're cramming, studying for an exam, or like she says here, you're having long single sessions of learning new information in school and at home. So you're studying for that final exam and you don't know 8 of the different like topics of the exam, but you're doing what you can to cram it all in. That is massed practice. So long single sessions of learning new information. Again, massed practice is when you have long single sessions of learning new information. All right, let's keep going.
So those nights when you crack your book open for the first time and pull an all-nighter to prepare for your exam, that would be massed practice. This can also happen in school. If you walk into your math class, sit down as the bell rings, and spend the next 2 hours learning two-step equations, that is massed practice. And it has actually been proven to be less effective than spaced practice.
Spaced practice means that you are reviewing or practicing new skills with a time delay between sessions. If information is repeated in a distributed fashion or spaced over time, it's learned more slowly but is retained for much longer.
Okay, so spaced practice. You have information that is presented in chunks, smaller sessions. Spaced, smaller, they both start with S. Spaced practice, smaller chunks, smaller sessions. You're repeating the learning and you're distributing it over time. So you're not going to do like a whole 2-hour segment, but you might do a little bit today, a little bit in a couple days, a little bit next week. You're spacing it out over a specific time frame that you need to, cover the content for your students. So she says that spaced practice, so short chunks over time, is more effective than massed practice, which is cramming or doing a bunch of one unit in one single day or, in a single window. Let's keep going.
Let's go back to our math class example. If you spend 25 minutes a day working on those two-step equations throughout the week, you will understand this concept much better than that 2-hour cram session in our last example.
So breaking that down again, she said, you spent 25 minutes a day, spaced practice, 25 minutes a day on two-step equations. You'll come out better understanding it than if you did a 2-hour cramming session on a single day of solving two-step equations. So again, for you teachers that are like, okay, what is spaced practice versus mass practice? Here you go. Spaced practice, shorter chunks, shorter sessions spread throughout your, a specific time frame. So for instance, you're working on systems of equations and you're doing 25-minute chunks a day for say 2 weeks, and then you give the test. That is better than if you just said, okay, guys, we're going to do 3 full days of two-step equations, 2-hour days, whatever, and you're just cramming it all in. So spaced practice is when you're taking shorter increments, shorter sessions, and it's been proven to be more effective. And here it says that it actually increases memory of the information that you're presenting to your students. All right, let's keep
You are
going.
more likely to feel comfortable with the information and maybe even remember it when you take your higher level math class next year.
I know, this sounds great. We are basically telling you that you don't have to study as much, but that's not exactly true. Spaced practice doesn't mean that you do your work for 20 minutes and then go take a nap. The same amount of instructional time is still being used, but the time you spend on each concept is broken up so that different examples of a concept are presented over time.
This makes sense because it's been proven also that, people retain things now in shorter, sessions or chunks, when you're looking at short-term memory versus long-term memory. So it makes sense because while that short-term memory is working, you can tap into that and teach a content, teach something, hook the student so that they can remember that and take it into the next day versus thinking that one whole day that's going to drain them, like studying all night or whatever, is the key. So this is really interesting. Let's keep listening. Well, before I play it again, look at what she says here. So spaced and mass practice, they both use the same amount of instructional time. And in a spaced practice, a rest period is needed between learning sessions. And the more cognitively demanding the task, the longer the rest period. Again, the more cognitively demanding the task, the longer the rest period. Awesome.
Also doesn't mean that you're only going to have 20 minutes of math class each day. The length of time between tasks depends on the complexity of the skill. If you are learning a simple task, say something that is only slightly different than that last lesson you learned, you only need brief rest periods between exposures. However, if you are tackling a complex and challenging task, it is usually more beneficial to have longer rest periods of at least 24 hours. We will give you a
I thought it was very interesting. So if you're like a review or something, or you're explaining like a standard that's going to take a couple of days, and you need to definitely have, she said here, she would suggest 24 hours of a waiting period. So for you rock stars out there, you're like, I've got a lot to cover, but this one's really lengthy, really, just a lot to it. Then they're suggesting that you actually give the students like a 24-hour break, and then they can revisit it. So let's look here and see what she says.
Few examples, in case you are still not convinced that what we are saying is true. Research was done with high school students learning French vocabulary. One group studied the words for 30 minutes in one day. That would be the mass practice. And one group studied the words for 10 minutes on 3 consecutive days. That would be the spaced practice. The group who studied the words over 3 days recalled 35% more words on a recall test 4 days after the last review.
Wow. Proof is in the pudding. There you have it. Look at this. I want spaced practice results. I don't know about you guys, but if my students could retain and recall 35% more words, we're doing something right. Do you know what? I'm going to stop sharing for a minute because this actually proves a point. This reminds me of why I used to wonder why I would get such great results with my students. I say this very humbly, with a wonderful team, where we went from 27% to 77% proficiency in a year. And I used to wonder, what the world did we do, right? Like sometimes you like look back and you're like, why were we successful? Like, what did we do? We did this. So it was spaced practice, but we didn't call that. We didn't call it that. We called it more boot camp, right? So we did math boot camps, and we would review the standards, and shout out to all my rockstar friends out there. You know who you are that were part of that. But we would do boot camps, and we would review benchmarks. And so we would chunk it up. And so say we would cover in the first week, we'd cover maybe 5 or 8 benchmarks. Then we would go to the next one, cover those benchmarks. But then we also had like in the boot camp stuff, we had a couple of different ones we were using as well. Like, yeah, we use what the book recommended for us, but we would use one from Miami-Dade that was like a long time ago, but it was so effective. So we would use that and like just kind of refer to it and see how we could tweak it and make it relevant. We would use some from like just other parts. I remember there was one up north. I want to say it was like Oregon or someone. Like they had prepared kind of like a similar style. So we got ideas from all of like across the nation. We kind of looked, and even though we were, we're in Florida, we still looked and saw like, okay, what are people doing that's effective, that's working for them in their areas. And so long story short, we were able to kind of put together a schedule, and the students were really gritty. They had to work hard. They couldn't feel sorry for themselves. Like they had to get the work done. But one thing I want to say to teachers is that the pressure that we gave, yeah, it was a lot, but we did review with the students. So I would give a packet to students, and like say there was like 80 problems in the packet, but we were reviewing it for 2 weeks. I made sure to go over every single problem with those students. And when they took notes, like I would make them like go to the whiteboard, take notes, and like verbatim, like walk them through the problem, check with students, make sure they understood it, and made sure they also knew which chapter it was coming from, which benchmark was being covered. This took a lot of work up front on my end. It was not easy on our team, or the district math specialist. Everyone was on board, and everyone like gave 150%. And it felt taxing, it felt like, oh my gosh, I'm giving all this extra energy, but it paid off. And so I'm giving you all these nuggets because I really hope that you're able to use these wherever you are in the nation to help students. So that's what we did, and we stuck to it. And at the end of it, I think we rewarded the kids with like a quiz grade or a test grade, even if they were able to show that they're proficient and that they understood it and they took notes and they reviewed it. So the first time we would go over it, like just like all together, making sure they were all on the same page, that they understood us. But then we would give like a quiz with like missing answer. We would like choose problems from that practice packet to make into like a quiz or a test later, and they had to show that they were proficient. And we made sure that we covered different benchmarks and standards. I think another reason why we were more effective than others was because we also made a big deal about vocabulary, and not just at the beginning of the year, but throughout. So kind of like a spaced practice of vocabulary. We would do like different vocabulary tests and quizzes. And it was so funny, like sometimes parents would be like, this is a math class. Why is my child learning vocab? Why do they have a vocab test? Why do they have a vocab quiz? But you need vocab in math as well. And so we would make sure that we would do like vocab walls and vocab quizzes, and that really helped tremendously as well. So just wanted to throw those nuggets out there for you. So let's go back to that video and see like what else the character was telling us.
There was also a study done on third graders who were learning their basic math facts. Those who practiced using a spaced model tested 70% correct, and those using a massed practice method tested 53% correct.
Wow.
These are
Look at that. The proof is in the pudding. I'm a data nerd. Give me data. You cannot deny data. Look at this. Spaced practice has 70% accuracy on tests versus massed practice, which has 53% accuracy on tests. So again, the proof is in the pudding here. We're seeing this. Let's keep listening.
only a few of the studies that have been done. Trust me, the research is pretty convincing.
I hope you have learned a lot. This quote pretty much sums it up. When you're studying, just remember, if information is repeated in a distributed fashion or spaced over time, it is learned more slowly but is retained for much longer.
That's awesome. So spaced out, it's retained, it's learned slowly, but retained much longer. That's what we're after for our students. And it makes sense because it goes with their ability to keep their long-term versus short-term memory and their attention span as well. So we learned a little bit about that. So now what I want to do is pull up just kind of like a little blog that I wrote for you guys out of love, where I kind of talk more about this with space versus mass practice. So I wrote this, and I hope you're able to get some nuggets out of this. In this, you will see I have hyperlinked a million different blogs and articles that you can also refer to later. So let's read about it. So in the field of education, particularly in math instruction, there's a debate between space and mass practice and how it's been a topic of interest. So spaced practice is when you're distinguished by distributing lessons and a particular benchmarker concepts for students over time, right? It's shown to enhance retention and transfer knowledge compared to mass practice, which involves concentrated study sessions, like she talked about. So concentrated study sessions, you're covering like, 4 hours worth of content, things like that. So we're going to talk in this about cognitive research, and we'll look at advantages of spaced practice in promoting long-term retention and deep understanding of the math concept. So I also wanted to cover some strategies for you. So first things first, strategy that I wanted to share with you is to find clever ways to utilize interleaved practice. So that's when you're mixing different types of problems or concepts within the same study session. So instead of just doing so for instance, she spoke about doing spaced practice and highlighting maybe like one topic, like systems of equations. Well, yeah, you can cover systems of equations, but you might want to focus on some of the content that is involved in not only getting systems of equations, but some other relevant topics as well that the students can relate to, like regarding equations in general. Maybe if you're going from systems of equations, after they do that, then you can focus on, like, you can decide how you want to take that. If you want to focus on, okay, now that you know how to solve for X and Y, now let's talk about finding solutions or finding zeros. And then, like going that trajectory, looking at the different types of graphs and types of functions and taking it to the next level. So if you want to take it from just solving equations to now really focusing on functions and all that, you can kind of do all that, but then you can do it in chunks over time to make sure students are understanding just parent functions and understanding the gist of what it takes to really solve equations and go there. So there's that. And then you've got here, she's talking, or I'm telling you guys. So it says in the math classroom, teachers can implement interleaved practice by incorporating a variety of problem types or math concepts into homework assignments, quizzes, and class activities. So I just talked about that a little bit. So it says here, instead of assigning a block of exercises solely focused on linear equations, you can combine problems related to linear equations, quadratic equations, and geometric concepts for your homework. So this helps you to really discern the appropriate problem-solving strategies for different contexts, which of course would lead your students to conceptual understanding and improved retention, which is what we're all about, right? Then down here, I'm talking more, say, when educators implement interleaved practice into their instructional practice, this disrupts the tendency that students will rely on that rote memorization, procedural fluency. So they're not really going deeper to conceptual understanding. They get stuck in that rut. And so when you're incorporating this interleaved practice, this helps teachers to facilitate the transfer of learning, like across all diverse contexts. And you're creating a more robust understanding of those math principles and standards that are addressed during the learning experience. Teachers, students are going to have questions. We cannot be afraid when students are asking you questions. We cannot be afraid to go there with them. And if there's a concept or a standard that you might not be as comfortable with, be honest and tell the student that you'll come back to them and do your homework, do some digging, talk to your peers, talk to your colleagues, and figure out what it is that you need to do and how you need to relay the information so students can understand that content and then come back, to show themselves proficient after you reviewed it with them. Now, let's look at the second strategy. You're also going to reinforce memory retention through spaced retrieval activities. So this is when you're systemically revisiting previously learned material at a spaced intervals, right, to reinforce that memory retention. So this could be implemented through various activities, of course, your review sessions, quizzes, and even on a digital platform. Like if there's like an opportunity for kids to, I know some digital platforms, they play games. Students could do things like that, or if there's like these like little quizzes, or if there's like little checks, like formative checks that they can tell you how they're doing and how they feel. Those are some key things that you can do there. There's also a spacing effect, which is a psychological phenomenon, and it talks about how teachers, they show that the information is better retained when that content from lessons on a particular content or topic is actually distributed over time rather. If I was an educator and I'm preparing students for like a final exam or some type of content, I would be very active at ensuring that students understood it through the chunk methods, as they're saying here. But I would look at the benchmarks and see what the benchmarks are saying and see how can I cover every benchmark before the end of the year. So come up with a schedule where you're able to tweak it and have those benchmarks to actually work for you in the classroom as you're reviewing those contents with those topics with your students. So, that's just some advice that I have for you as you're ending the school year. Now, let's get back to this blog that I shared with you. Let's keep it moving. So, I spoke about, the space phenomenon that we talked about before, space retrieval. And then also, it says here, furthermore, implementing spaced retrieval activities helps teachers to remain proactive. That's it, right? Against the reality that concepts covered in a math class can gradually be lost over time without reinforcement. So it can also ensure that students can retain mastery of essential mathematical skills. Now, the last strategy I wanted to share with you is to foster that metacognitive awareness. I'm big on this. Metacognitive awareness is when your students develop an understanding of their own learning processes and strategies needed for proficiency. So you can support them by explicitly teaching habits and learning outcomes and You can engage your students in metacognitive discussions and encourage them to look at different studying techniques. This is huge because students, like, it's easy to assume, right, that students know how to study and that, they've got a good work ethic and that they're gritty, but sometimes they're not. So you have to actually like get to know your students and get nosy. Like figure out like how do you study? Did you study? Like what do you do when you study? You'd be amazed. Some students will say, "Well, I just looked at it and it looks good. It looked good. Yeah, I got it." And I would tell students, listen, I understand you looked, but studies show that when you only look at something and you're like a visual learner, you retain about 20% of that knowledge versus if you actually write it down and review it, that's like it goes up to like 80%. So I always tell my students it's not enough to just look. We've got to be more intentional and more proactive at making sure that we're understanding this content. And so therefore I would have my students like write out what they're doing. And I would encourage you to do the same for the students, especially the wonderful rockstar students out there that they just get it, and so they're like, I don't really have to study hard. Like, it's good, but you still have to show me that you know what you're doing. So yeah, so there's that. So let's go back to this blog. So also it talks here about when you're doing this and you're fostering that metacognitive awareness for all your students, you're also, as a teacher, you can provide your students with those opportunities to like monitor their own learning progress through self-assessment activities and through a reflective journal. Huge. And through grading practices. Reflective journal is everything. And so it says here, when teachers cultivate metacognitive awareness during instructional delivery, they empower students to take ownership of their learning and make informed decisions about their study habits. So maybe there's a study habit that they thought they were good with, like maybe index cards, and maybe they weren't as good with that, versus actually like having like an oral review where they like sit and talk and explain the concepts of people. Okay, and so ultimately, by fostering the metacognitive awareness in math classrooms, teachers can equip students with tools that they need to become lifelong learners and proficient problem solvers. So, in conclusion, the effective implementation of spaced versus mass practice techniques is crucial for all teachers desiring to maximize the learning outcomes in your classroom, guys. Okay, and these strategies, they don't skills including critical thinking, problem solving, and self regulated learning. So, as educators continue to strive to meet diverse needs of their students, integrating spaced practice techniques into your math classrooms, that's going to offer a promising pathway, towards academic excellence and student success. So there you have it. I hope that you guys now understand that spaced practice is when you're spacing it out over time, chunking it up, and even, kind of like the concept of cycling things. When a student didn't get it, you cycle it back through in small, short chunks. It's kind of the same, but anyways. And then of course, with the massed practice is more cramming, and students are just taking all of that content and trying to learn like, that one standard for like 24 hours, which is not as effective. So with that said, guys, thank you so much again for joining me on the Grit and Equity Talks podcast with your host, Dr. India White. Going back to those announcements for those that joined me a little late. If you were just joining me a little bit late, I wanted to remind you again that the Grit and Equity Talks podcast with Dr. India White, it will be featured on the X Factor EDU network hosted by Dr. Matthew Joseph and the Tribe, and it will be found on Spotify as well. I wanted to also remind you to please follow me on social media. Facebook is Miss India White. LinkedIn is The India White. Twitter is Indy Speak and Teach. Instagram is Indy238. YouTube channel is India White 123. And TikTok is Dr. India White. I do have a grit mini workshop, a grassroots workshop. Check that out when you get a chance. It is called How to Harness Grit to Help Students Thrive. So it's there for you. Tell your teachers about it. Spread the word. Let's get involved. Okay. I also wanted to remind you guys of some upcoming events that I have coming up where I hope I'll be able to see some of you. Wisconsin Math Council. I'm here right now. We are finishing that up. And then, of course, I've got some events planned at FCTM where I'll be speaking there. I'll be at Camp's Conference in July. I'll be at NCSM and ICTM as well, and some other ones that I mentioned earlier. So catch me while you can. I hope to see you guys. And so again, from the bottom of my heart, I'm so thankful that you guys did join me today on the Grit and Equity Talks podcast. If you need anything from me, please email me at india.white.123@gmail.com. Visit my website, www.india-white.com. Let us partner together. Let's get some things done. And no matter what, stay gritty. Okay? I'll see you guys next time.